other projects that I'm working on is a special edition for the American Journal of Community Psychology that focuses on decoloniality in teaching community and allied disciplines, community psychology and allied disciplines. This was a fascinating project to start with because I thought about it and I thought I want to take it to the top journal in community psychology to engage and to insert this conversation in probably the most mainstream journal in my field of specialization. And as I was sitting in my office one day, I thought, sure, little me in the South. And then I thought, no, I'm going to do this. And I contacted the editor, and he was very excited about it. I sent him the proposal, and I think, you know, what I learned from that, I was over the moon when he said yes. And as when most people say yes to our request, we're all over the moon, but this was a very special request. And it was a very special yes, precisely because for me it was a very important political act as well as an important academic act. It spoke for me to much of what we talk about around decoloniality, reframing the mind to think that it's important to insert this conversation into a particular space in order to have a global group and audience engage with the issues that we think are everyday issues locally. I think it also begins when one looks at the kinds of conversations, brilliant conversations that are being had in that journal. What I was particularly interested was to ask people to provide practical examples. And that is never easy when one talks about decolonization or decoloniality. But most of the contributions that have been accepted have provided, they've theorized it deeply. Their work in teaching and learning, they've theorized it deeply, but they've also provided, of course, practical examples. And so this is another project that I'm really excited about. It comes from, and what it's made me realize is how it's very important perhaps sometimes not to engage in dualistic thinking. Precisely because it showed me how the North lives, how the North exists in the South and how the South exists in the North. I think when one listens to stories of colonization in Canada, in the USA, in Australia, in the UK, then I think it will begin to undo some of the views we have about colonization only being a conversation that's important in the global South. And that is just one view. Now I'm in the process of writing the editorial for that piece, for that journal, because I think it's certainly expanded the way in which I think about what the conversations are, and how perhaps if one thinks, just removes oneself from the situation and looks down in order hopefully to get a bird's eye view. One can never get there because you are always immersed in a certain context, and you are framed by your place and space in many ways. But I think it's also important to get and formulate a framing that also looks from the outside in, while being on the inside. So it was a huge risk to take. I felt at the time it's a huge risk to insert myself into that space, but I also think it's a risk, a calculated risk, that worked out well. And perhaps at another time, it's perhaps important to encourage many of our brilliant South African academics and authors within the context of psychology to, in fact, think about what it means to create global platforms from within which an African, the work of African scholars, and not only the work, but the trailblazing kind of initiatives of African scholars can be foregrounded and, in fact, inserted into conversations that aren't happening to the extent as they would in global spaces too.